Good evening, everyone. I am Juanita Shepherd. I am happy again to have you here for another conversation regarding faith and philanthropy. Those who have been with us for the last 2 or 3 conversations, this has been a continuing of education for all of us and learning and understanding what it means to work in both, walk in both areas of both our faith communities, as well as understanding this place of giving, or the term we use is philanthropy. And so tonight I have 2 wonderful speakers who are here, who are passionate about the work that they do. And we'll be talking about raising up a generous generation. So what does that look like? You know, how could we look at giving? When you think about your children, what does that mean to your children's children? Do we even talk about money around our children? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we have 2 experts with us here on tonight. Our first panelist is Audrey Jacobs. Audrey serves as the principal for the Sarafina group, and she's a consultant to the philanthropic and nonprofit organizations. And she formerly was the director of the Center for Family Philanthropy at the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. So again, we're happy to have Audrey with us. And then secondly, we'll bring on Pastor DJ. And I'll let him introduce himself, but he serves as the next generation pastor for the Montgomery Community Church. He's the founder of DTJ Ministries, as well as the International General Overseer of Children and Youth for the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship. So Audrey, why don't you just take a moment and just greet the people on tonight?
Good evening, everyone. Good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Juanita.
Great, and Pastor DJ?
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Good evening, everyone. Excited to be here, excited for the conversation, and looking forward to the dialogue.
Great. So let's just go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to kind of bring up in this conversation is around what are some basics in understanding the drivers of our generation in terms of giving. Audrey, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I've been thinking a lot about this, Juanita, and I started looking up, characteristics of different generations, right? We have the, traditionalists, folks born, before 1945. So, our grandparents, and for some of us, our parents. And then you have baby boomers born between the 40s and in 1964, of which I am one. And then you'll have Gen X, and then you'll have millennials, and some say Gen Z. And there are different characteristics. And I looked at some of the characteristics of giving, traditionalists, the literature says that they focus on basic needs and supporting emergency relief, whereas millennials are focused on the environment, and boomers maybe will support, Gen X and boomers may support first responders and health services. But I think so much of giving across generations is about your family and your culture, how you were raised, and what is important to you as a family. And so I've been thinking particularly about philanthropy now, and what philanthropy means for us as Black and Brown people in particular, and how important it is to think about philanthropy beyond the giving of dollars, but giving of really your time, your talent, your treasures, but supporting and being part of a community and understanding the needs. I think we've always been philanthropic. We've always taken care of people in our community. And that's when I think about philanthropy, and I think about it in our communities, that's what it looks like. It doesn't necessarily look like giving for the, the tax deductions. It's very different. It's about support. It's about taking care of each other. It's about raising children with values.
That's awesome, Audrey. Pastor DJ, you want to tie in that conversation at all?
Yeah, I love what she said, and part of what I did for 21 years was work with nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations, and the Community Foundation of Greater Flint is run by a fraternity brother of mine, but it's it's an organization that worked really closely with the college where I was before coming here. And one of the things that we would talk about when we would talk about financial stability, and we would talk about, things that were related to not just, their economic status, but them understanding their economic status. And I think that, especially in our community, the Black and Brown community, our examples are what hit home or miss. Those examples that we have, there are in some areas, there are 2 to 4 generations living in the same home, and they're all on state assistance. Okay. But then they can dress like us, who get up and go to work every day. You know what I mean? And so the example and what they're presented, that many times the sad part is that they get so far going down the wrong path that they don't know it until they're not able to kind of dig themselves out of it. So I think that the examples that they are presented and that we're able to present as a community is very important, but it's also it's concerning that it seems that there are pockets of people who get it and want to share that knowledge and wisdom, but we're not always able to garner enough individuals who are willing to do the work. They'll listen, but then they think that this is kind of, if I do this, then I'll be fine. No, it may take some work and it may take some time, but it is achievable. And I think those are the message that we need to send as far as where they are, what this current generation is doing, what they've seen before them, and then what that generation saw before them. Because sometimes the majority of the time, it matriculates through generations. And by the time you get to it, it's like, man, I've got to fix or overcome a lot of damage over time, and it may take a minute to get there, but having the will to do it, I think it's absolutely doable, and I think we can make it happen.
Absolutely. I know for me, when I was thinking about this topic, I feel like a lot of our giving and philanthropy is driven by what was happening during our time span. And so I know Audrey kind of mentioned a little bit about this. And so we think about our, grandparents, our great-grandparents who had to live through the Depression, and how were they helped during that time or not helped during that time. You think about the Vietnam War, or you think about the Great Recession. In our time, for sure, we're looking at political and racial unrest. And so what does that mean? And what becomes important and bubbles up to being important for us? There was a study that I had a chance to look through a little bit. This is interesting to me. So I just want to share a little bit about this. It was called Giving for Good, and talk about the generational differences and how we see philanthropy. And it was interesting to me. So some of the differences they were saying that kind of drives how people think about philanthropy is really, they were saying 33% they lack involvement of children's involvement when we talk about our giving conversations. And I thought about that even with my own kids. I give to organizations, I give to nonprofits, I give to my faith community. But the truth is, I never really had a conversation with my children about why I give to XYZ Foundation, or why I give to XYZ organization, or what are the values or the things that kind of lend me towards that. So I thought that was interesting, because the other thing it brought up is that 25% of us lack parental transparency when it comes to talking to our kids about that.
I think though, Juanita, that's around giving of dollars.
Yes.
And again, I think if you think about philanthropy in a broader sense, it may look a little bit different. And so I was thinking about that. Maybe growing up, maybe I didn't see my parents giving a lot of money to organizations in a very formalized way, right? Through either check or having a fund. My parents didn't have a donor advised fund or a foundation, but I knew that they helped others in the community. My parents, so we didn't grow up here in the States, but my parents were part of what we would call a partner. And I knew about that. And I knew that a group of families would contribute money to a pot each week. And then every week, someone would get a share, a draw, as they called it. And so they got some money, and maybe it was for a down payment on a home, Or we always knew that if somebody was in trouble in the family, in the community, that we would step in to help. If, you know, if a family couldn't take care of their child, another family would help. And, you know, we now call that kinship foster care. And so philanthropy took place in different ways. I was, you know, we think of people like Aretha Franklin, right, as an amazing singer, but she helped to fund so much of the civil rights movement. And so thinking about, again, what was happening during our times, you know, families growing up during Jim Crow with children, and during Jim Crow segregation, and the fact that we're still addressing some of those issues today in greater ways suggests also the importance of sort of families having conversations about history, about the way in which parents grew up, of what issues they were facing. Again, could be different, and it's different for different families, whether you're, you know, rural, urban, Black, white, immigrant, Native American, but really having the time to talk about and spending the time to talk about what the family story is really important.
So Pastor DJ, why don't you talk to us a little bit about your family story and how that ties into your giving?
So my grandfather, Lucius Fleming, God rest his soul, took me to Citizens Bank, that is no longer a bank anymore, in Flint, Michigan, and started my very first savings account. Okay. And I was 7 years old. He took me into the bank, and I had cut the grass, so he'd given me my $5, right? And he told me what to do. Now, I'm 7. I don't really get it, but you know, I love the idea of being able to do some things, right? Well, my grandfather led by example. He showed me some things. So my grandfather and my grandmother were the children of sharecroppers. Okay, she was from Allentown, Pennsylvania, and he was from Olympia, Tennessee. Okay, so the home that my mother grew up in, he built with his hands. Okay, here, in Flint, Michigan, he built it with his hands. So I grew up understanding work ethic. I grew up understanding how to be quote unquote frugal, right? And how to acquire things. So as I sit back as a grown man now, or even in my mid 20s, when I could look back and reflect on what granddad had, what the family had at the time that I didn't understand, my family owns a plot and a summer home in Idlewild, Michigan. Okay, which was the vacation spot for many, Black and brown people that migrated up from the South. Right. So as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, not really knowing what's going on, I had a family. My grandfather had established generational wealth, and I had no idea. So the 4 properties he owned, the motorhome he owned, the multiple boats that he owned, I just saw one boat at a time. I never saw them lined up next to each other. You know what I mean? So him taking me in and teaching me, even at a young age, what it meant to save and what it meant to put up, because then you could go borrow from yourself if you needed to. You know what I mean? Or you had the collateral or the currency, if you will, the credit. You know, traditional credit is not good credit anymore. Mm-hmm. There was a time when, you could save and, but that's not even good credit anymore. So all these things that were happening at a young age helped me start to learn how to do some of the things for myself. So as a young man, being able to buy my first home at 26, granddad wasn't around to see it anymore, but to know that I had taken those skills and did that without a cosigner, without some astronomical interest rate. It was a fixed 6% on my first home, right? And that's 2004. And I bought my first home by myself, right? So it was this amazing thing that was happening in my life that until I got older, I couldn't really look back and understand what those principles were. But what else he did though, was he taught me how to save, but he taught me how to give. So I learned to tithe as a little boy. So I knew that out of that $5, I had to give my 50 cents. Okay. And so I did it. And because I grew up understanding that the principle works, I think that it's been lost on this generation in a lot of ways, the last few generations, if you will, because giving was always tied to getting something.
Yeah.
Whether it was from the Lord, or whether it was the tax write-off, or whether it was the notoriety because your name was going to be on some list, so it became less genuine and less a part of what you did in order to be an act of notoriety or to get or to gain something. So I think that somewhere in there, the breakdown in communication has happened. But I was telling Miss Audrey before we went live that I thank God for my grandparents and for my mother, who are all going on to be with the Lord now. But I'm thankful for the lessons that I learned, because things haven't been perfect. But I guarantee you, sometimes I look against individuals that came up with me and I wonder what happened. You know,
there's that whole gap. And I remember Bishop Morton even talking about this. It's like he have his children, they see him as Bishop Morton with all the provisions. But he talks about this, and that his children didn't see when he was scraping pennies and nickels and he had the coin jars, you know, trying to take care of things. And so sometimes, you know, we've kind of got things right by the time our kids get to a certain age and they realize where we are, but they don't understand the struggle that happened before, the investment of time.
Right.
And they do now. It's certain things happen. So we're talking about our children. So my oldest daughter, Jasmine, texted me, this is probably about 5 or 6 months ago. She was like, Dad, she was like, is this what you meant? She's talking about car repair and car upkeep. She's like, is this what you meant when you would tell us no sometimes? Because they were younger, and sometimes, I taught them this principle. This was our family principle. There'll be times I have to tell you no, so that other times I can tell you yes. Okay. And I taught them that growing up all the time. And Jazz would be like, well, Dad, is this what you meant? She was like, all I needed was brakes and 2 tires. And I said, yeah. I said, yeah, you paid almost $1,000, didn't you? Two, didn't you? She was, yeah. I was like, okay. I said, so now it makes sense. Before, you know, when you guys were 7 and 8, you were just mad because I said no. But now you understand.
Right.
That adulting is real.
Oh, absolutely. And you don't get to go back.
Awesome. So Audrey, why don't you talk to us a little bit about this whole sense of what does it mean to grow up a generation of giving? If you kind of take us through that, what are some things you can talk to us about in terms of how you may talk to some of the people in your philanthropic sphere? What does that look like to grow up a generation? What kind of conversation should we be having?
I think it's conversations, but I think it's even actions, right? And so I work with families that will, you know, have the baby on the baby Bjorn and go out and maybe sort at the food bank or do a cleanup so it becomes philanthropy is a way of life and giving is a way of life. And so it is just like, it is part of life. It's part of living. It's about having those conversations and age appropriate conversations, but really helping children to understand that they don't live in isolation and they're not able to get all of their needs met. You know, it's something as simple as having a piggy bank or a spend, save, share box for little kids, right? And then as kids start going to school, continuing to do things as a family, taking children along when you're volunteering or talking to them about organizations that you're supporting in a way that they can understand. But when they're younger, it's really by actions. And as the children get older, I work with families and encourage all families to start having family meetings to talk about philanthropy as part of the overall family work, really, that a family will set goals for the family and have involve each person. You know, young kids as young as 7, 8 can be part of those conversations. They can talk about what they want to accomplish for the year. They can talk about what they care about. You as parents, though, can also begin to talk with them about the fact that they may, you know, have material wealth, or they may have access to schools that are full of resources, but there are other children that have less. You know, for my family, we are a family of immigrants. And so, you know, we've raised our children, helping them to understand that, you know, that our family was fortunate in coming to the States, and that we have family and lots of people that were left behind, and some chose to stay in Jamaica, but there's poverty and that they can help. And so, you know, we've sent books, we send money, I mean, send clothes when we can. And so involving children in that way is important. I think taking the time, as I said, through family meetings to do things like a family timeline, to talk again about the family stories, to really share what things came up in the family history that are important today and moving forward, and engaging and involving the kids, and maybe starting off small when it comes to giving of money or treasure. You know, giving children a certain amount, maybe somehow tying it into allowances as well. I think having children do something for allowances helps on a number of levels, helps them think about money, begin to manage money, begin to save money, and to think about giving and sharing what they have, taking that time and making it, again, part of life, part of what is done, and continuing that in that vein as they get older, and maybe increasing the amount of money that you will give to your child, having them, you know, do things on their own to raise funds and then match those dollars. And then talking about what they're doing with the dollars, or what organizations they're volunteering with and why, and what it means to them and what difference they're making.
That's awesome, Audrey. Wow.
I 100% agree with that, Miss Audrey. And I would say that I think, not to sum up your comments, but in my mind, what I kept thinking of was communication, history, legacy, and explaining the why. Explaining why we do it, explain why you give of your time, and you maybe start with your time before you get to your treasure. Say, hey, this is something good to do. It's good to do. Excuse me. I've been shocked at times talking with people, even some in my generation and the two generations, you know, after me, that don't even know that the NAACP stands for the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People. They know the letters, but they don't know what it is. They don't know why it was formed. They don't know what happened and all the things that led up to it. And it's not enough for them to know the NAACP now. They need to know the NAACP then. That's just an example, but I think that communication that Ms. Audrey was talking about promotes not only generational sustainability, but it promotes generational education and understanding. As someone who didn't complete his first degree till he was 40, and then completed 3 degrees in 6 years, I understand what that means. So as much as my grandfather instilled in me, or my grandparents and my mom, the people around me, my village that instilled in me, there were still things that I still had to experience for myself. But because I was given a certain level of knowledge, a certain amount of knowledge, when I saw it, I recognized it. My experience was going to be different than others, maybe, but I recognized it and I was able to step into it. And I think that if we're diligent in what we teach the generations following us, it will allow us, one, to close the gap, but there is a communication gap, a multi-generational communication gap that we haven't successfully been closing. But I think in pockets, the work that Ms. Audrey does, and yourself, and in the space that I'm in, and others that we know. I talked about Isaiah with the Community Foundation in Flint, Michigan, and other individuals that I know that are doing their best to close certain gaps, right? But it's like you've got so many people trying to do the work that if there was more collaboration, we could do a greater work.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm definitely one for collaboration. So Pastor DJ, so I know you kind of head up the youth ministry for Full Gospel, and you work with a lot of children, both at the international conference and in the regions. The question I have for you is, sometimes I feel like we discount children and their own thinking abilities when it comes to philanthropy and giving. and understanding that. So can you talk to us a little bit about what works for you when you're in these sessions and you're talking to the children?
Well, the Apostle Paul said that, and I'm going to paraphrase, I became all things to all men so that I might by all means save some, right? And the Message Bible says I have to step into their space to understand things from their perspective. So for me, it's listening. My first move is to listen, is to pay attention, is to understand where they are, to understand what struggles or challenges that they're facing in a right now, day-to-day basis, so that I understand which fight I have when I step into the engagement, okay? And when I say fight, I use that term loosely because typically if I step in and have an understanding, I can spur conversation. So what typically works for us is, one, they know that we care enough to listen and that we hear them. Because listening and hearing are not the same thing. We could all start talking and we could hear one another. But the only way we could listen is if we stopped to tune in to what one person was saying, and then we would really be listening. So being able to listen to them and hear them, separately and then collectively is one part. The other part is they have to know you care. Okay. And I've told my children and even my godchildren that you can't have my love and not accept my discipline. Okay. And that's verbal, that's intellectual, that's educational, that's whatever that discipline comes along with that love, you have to take them both. They are matching pair. Right. And because of that, I've been able to foster relationships. So first, listen, then two, build relationships. Once you're in that space and you've built a relationship, you can give them the keys to the kingdom, if you will. You can say, hey, here's how you do this and here's how I know. But until you get them to the point to where they want to hear you and listen to you, they it's not going to happen because they have to believe what you're saying. And there is this huge gap as it relates to trust in, Gen Z, Gen Y, our millennials, our young adults. They don't like being called millennials. I, have to make sure I put that out there. They don't like that name anymore. But there's this communication gap and there's this trust gap because they are the generations, those three that I just mentioned, they're the generations that they are not about, do as I do as I say, not as I do. Nah, that's not flying with them anymore. Mm-hmm. So they're reading for themselves. They're educating for themselves. They're getting clarity and understanding for themselves. So when what you say doesn't match what they understand, then you already got an issue because there's a lack of trust. So listening to them, hearing them, developing a relationship from a place of understanding and clarity, and then being able to really build that trust is how it happens. And if you've got those, you can go pretty much in any direction where you are working with young people, because once they're with you, they're with you. But once they leave you, it's hard. Yeah. If a trust is broken with those generations, you almost never get it back. Right. They'll tolerate you if they still live in their parents' house because they gotta come. But the moment they don't have to, it's a done deal. It's over. Okay, so those are the pieces that I found that work the most. And I'll just add these two: being transparent and being honest. Setting the standard for honest and open communication creates this relationship of trust and dialogue. And the best thing you can have, the best currency you can have with these generations is being able to talk to them. Okay, because if you can't even have a conversation with them, it's a non-starter.
Awesome. So Audrey, talk to us a little bit about kind of going back a little bit further. What can parents and grandparents do in terms of, I guess, growing up this generation? Sure. What kind of things contribute?
Parents can be really intentional in planning volunteer opportunities that allow the entire family to be involved. There are organizations that their mission is to provide volunteer experiences for children and families. One that comes to mind here in Atlanta is an organization called Pebble Tossers, where, and given the pandemic, where you can work on things at home to donate, right? Whether it be, packages for babies at the neonatal center at Grady, or, cards to seniors, but really encouraging opportunities and providing opportunities for kids to be involved from an early age. And then in terms of a more formal approach to philanthropy, as I mentioned, doing a family meeting, developing a family mission statement. And a mission statement would be, what does the family unit, and family defined in its broadest sense, right? A group of people who love each other, whether by blood or not, who want to come together, to be together, to do philanthropy together. But coming together, developing a mission statement, indicating the family's purpose around philanthropy. What do they want to accomplish? Really, and developing a plan, thinking about what particular values are most important to the family, and go through some exercises. There are tools out there that that I've used, but you can do it in many different ways. For example, there's an organization called 2164 that has some motivational values cards, and these are just a series of cards with values attached to them, but you can make up your own, right? You can write them on Post-its. So things like what's most important: family, community, social justice, racial equity. What are the things that are important? And have that exercise, and have the family, everybody in the family, play a role in identifying maybe the top 5 values that are important to them. And then, seeing where there's synergy, seeing how many family members share racial justice as an issue of concern, or as a key value. And then you can do the same thing for issue areas. But I would say that given the times that we're in right now, I feel it's really important for us to speak with our families about what's happening right now in the world, and focus our attention on making a difference where we can. And that could be as broadly as, education equity. So, having the family think about collectively supporting, a school in a community that is under-resourced, or, if it's racial justice, so, supporting organizations like, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, or, purposely taking your family to the Equal Justice Initiative, understanding what the issues are, having conversations about it, getting kids to do the research about organizations that are doing the work. And again, setting a plan, for a 1-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan even, but talking as a family about what it is you want to accomplish. What difference do you want to make? And you can do these family meetings around holidays. I find that usually works well when everybody comes together. Dartanyan, you mentioned that, your children are geographically dispersed, and, they're doing their own thing. And it's really difficult when the kids are in their 20s and they're building their own lives. But, if everybody comes together around the holidays, that's a perfect time to just sit down and do a family meeting. If you have the ability, again, to, give a certain amount of dollars to the kids, and say, I'm giving this to you to share, right? To donate. Come to me, come to us, come to the family with organizations that you'd like to support, but do some research, talk about why, talk about what they need. You don't necessarily focus so much on, whether the organization is crossing its I's and dotting its T's, but really the due diligence is about, is the organization making a difference in an area that you care about? all too often, particularly for organizations led by Black and Brown people, they have to jump through so many hoops to get a little bit of money that it's just not fair. So encourage again your family to think beyond some of the sort of known organizations, some of the larger organizations, but look at the organizations that are making a difference in their communities. So again, having everybody do the research, come back, and then, develop a process, whether you vote or whether you allocate certain amount of dollars to each person and they, make their own decisions, but come back and talk about it. And then also make sure that you get to know the organizations over the course of the year, so that at the next family meeting, you come back and you talk about what your dollars did, what difference it made, and how well were those dollars used. But also get involved as a volunteer, maybe consider joining a board if you have the ability and the time to help, because that's really important. Nonprofits, organizations really need strong board members who will be strong advocates for them. You mentioned grandparents a couple of times. I think grandparents, play that very special role. Again, depending on the age of the kids, grandparents can be the ones taking the kids to do service projects, but they can also, provide them with some financial resources if they have it, or maybe match the dollars. So encourage the kids to go out and raise some dollars, and then grandparents can match that. I think it's also important, and I probably am sounding like a broken record, but having kids go spend time with their grandparents and hear their life story, and maybe even record it and document it. I'm a huge, huge fan of StoryCorps. I love what StoryCorps stands for, and it's listening is an act of love. But through those conversations with grandparents, again, you begin to hear what's important to the family. The grandparents are transferring values to the grandchildren and helping them think about ways in which they can give back, be part of a community, and make a difference as they get older. So those are some of the things that come to mind. Again, to the extent that there's wealth and there's opportunity for parents and grandparents to set up, specific funds on behalf of adult children, that's great. But I think there's greater value in coming together and talking about how they can give of their talents as well and service, so that it's not just all about the dollars.
Awesome. That's really rich information, Audrey.
Yeah.
Pastor DJ, so my next question to you, it's really a charge or a challenge to our faith community.
Okay.
And so as best as you can, what would you say at different stages of your life that you would challenge or bring awareness to in the faith community? What would you like to uplift at various ages? So, what should the faith community know about a 5-year-old? What should we know, and how should we address or think about this type of things for a 15-year-old? And then I want to leave out young adults, because I feel like they're kind of like, we have the kids, and the young adults are kind of, you kind of, they say, age out the process.
Kind of age out. Well, I would say that if we think about it this way, at 5 years old, they are super trusting, but they are sponges. They are absorbing everything that you're doing. Okay, so we know Proverbs 22:6 says, train them up the way they should go. Well, that's a principle. Okay, and that, because it's a principle, if you teach them wrong, they'll absorb that too. Okay, so when they're that young, they're impressionable. They are, I believe it's around the age of 7 or 8, they've figured out who they're going to be. They're kind of their person, okay, within themselves by the time they're 7 or 8, right? But at 5 years old, you still have the opportunity to mold them, okay? But remember, what you do, what you say has to match what you do, okay? And if they see it, they're having two conversations: the one that they have with you, and the one they're having in their head. It's like, okay, I know I'm gonna get in trouble if I do this, but I see what they did. Okay, it's like, if we could hear a kid's inner dialogue or inner monologue, it would probably be hilarious. Okay, but at 5 years old, they are a sponge. They're soaking up everything, right? And what you do with them between the ages of 5 and 7 is going to determine if you can reach them when they're 15.
Wow.
Okay, some foundation has to be laid when they are that young, so that when they're 15, 16, and 17, if nothing else, they're going to listen to you. They may have different examples or different influences that are around them, and they will. Okay, and newsflash, parents, you could cross every T and dot every I, but there are some choices that your children are going to make. It's going to make your head swim, and it won't be an indictment on your parental vigor, if you will. It won't be an indictment on your parental acumen and abilities. No, they're going to make some choices. Okay, and those choices may be contrary to what you taught them. So just woosah right now. Remember that on April 19th of 2021, Pastor DJ told you it won't be your fault. Okay, they're just going to make some choices that we won't agree with, right? So if you do the best you can when they're 5, if nothing else, 14 and 15 and 16, they're listening to you. Okay, and once they're listening and the things that you've told them are proven, by the time they're young adults, they'll remember. Okay, so remember, there's a lot that happens between the time they're young and they're old. Okay, a whole lot happens between there, but the scripture says when they're old, they'll remember. Okay, so what you do is pray that they get old. That's what you pray. That's the prayer. The prayer is that they get old, so that they have the opportunity to implement what they remember. So I say that generally like that because there are so many ways we could go, but in the faith community, we cannot discount or discredit our young people because they are not the biggest givers. Okay, and many times they can be the biggest givers of time. Okay, they do a lot of the cleaning up and a lot of the other stuff, right? And time is a tide. Okay, but there's a lot that they should not be discounted for, and understand that once they feel discounted, then they won't trust you. Then they won't hear you. Okay, so those are some things that we really have to consider, and we understand that they are not big givers, but we have to make sure that they are taught well, they're educated well, they are given the history of why we are as a people, as a ministry, as a community, as a country, and the truth of it, so that when they get to that point where they have to make decisions, they are at least well informed. Okay, so we have to make sure we do due diligence with that, because they'll remember. And if you mistreat them, they'll remember that too. Okay, and who's going to take care of us when we owe? We hope them. But if you don't do them right, yeah, they'll ship us off to Shady Acres or somewhere and say, So, but yeah, I would dare say that there's this multi-generational need to I call them my twilights. And those are my great aunts and people like that. That's just my twilight generation, right? But they know just about everything. If you just sat down, my grandparents were 70 when I was born, my mother's parents. They were 70 when I was born, right? So I grew up around wisdom. My granddad taught me to drive at 11, but I heard things my granddad was saying. It was strange. He would say, if you want to know how to cross the bridge, ask someone who's trod that way. I still, Miss Audrey, don't know what trod means, but that's what he used to say, right? But I would sit there and I would just soak all of this stuff up, and it wasn't the grown-up conversation I shouldn't be listening to. They were talking about history. They were talking about his mother, who I never met, of course, and they would talk about all those things. And, being the children of sharecroppers, my great-grandparents were slaves. So, because remember, they were 70 when I was born. So it's like granddad was born 1905. So it's like, there's a whole lot going on there. So as I'm able to compartmentalize it now and think about it, and I can remember that, it's been incumbent upon me now in the past several months to really start to piece together our family tree and our history and things that I may find out and I may not find out because there was such a huge age gap, when I was born. And it was like, man, I lost my grandmother when I was 12, lost granddad when I was 15. getting ready to turn 15. So there was so much of my life left that I didn't get to talk to him about in my adulthood, right? So I think it's important that as young as we can get them is that we start to instill things in them, but it don't feel like school. Teach them and say a little something, or you take them on road trips. Granted, we drove everywhere. I didn't get on a airplane till I was like 21. We drove everywhere, right? So take those road trips, take them, you know, to the places and the plantations and other things that are tied to your family's history, because I think if we teach them that and then teach them how to give of themselves, giving from their pocket will be real easy. Even the Lord tells us in his word, he said, if you seek my face, I'll give you what's in my hand. You know, so if we're intentional about that, I think that it'll be a blessing to them and their lives, but then they'll be a blessing to the generations that sold into them. Okay. And I think that that'll be really advantageous.
I think, Juanita, I think it's also important to lift up grandparents, parents, educators, people in our community who make a difference, who may not get the limelight. We know about the athletes and I you know, entertainers that get so much of our attention through the media, but I think it's incumbent upon us also to lift up others who may not be so much out in the front, but are working really hard in the background to make a difference for our communities on a larger scale, who are giving of their, you know, their time, their talents, and their treasures. The scientists, the doctors, the lawyers who are out there really fighting for us in their own ways.
I agree with that. Absolutely. And the advocates, because we hear a lot about that in the season that we're in.
Right.
Giving people I know right now, teachers.
Right.
They're giving,
especially teachers, especially teachers.
Yeah. Underpaid and undervalued.
Exactly.
And still giving and buying supplies out of the money that they realize.
Right. Right. Every year. Yeah. Yeah.
So this has been an awesome conversation. I wonder, are there any parting words or any other burning points you want to make before we call it a night?
Ms. Audrey?
I think one of the things that I didn't say much about is that connection to thinking about raising your children to be generous and to be givers, to be caring, but also raising your children to understand money, really, and understand that there are choices that you can make, and that maybe instead of buying the sneakers for $175, you can get the $125 sneakers and put aside $50 so that you could help an organization. You know, and there are wonderful organizations out there that will give you suggestions of, you know, smaller organizations to support. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention ABFE, the Association of Black Foundation Executives, that just put out a report that highlights many Black-led organizations throughout the country. And then there's another organization called Give Black, BLCK, started by a woman named Stephanie Ellis Smith, that also is really pulling together all of those organizations and vetting them and making sure that they are highlighted and lifted up and supported. But I would say that you know, giving is always, it should be part of everything that we do. It should be part of our, you know, our life, just as we plan, you know, to celebrate the holidays, but plan to be philanthropic and to support people in need in our communities.
Awesome. 100% agree. When you were saying to tell them maybe get the cheaper sneakers. Well, I'm in 2 group chats with my children, my biological children, and then my godchildren. I have godchildren that are young adults as well. And just today, I sent a message and said, hey guys, I said, before you buy, because I got my oldest son, Justin, and then my godson, William, they are sneakerheads. Just like, I mean, they get it honest, okay? Except except I don't get to wear sneakers that much. So mine stay in pretty mint condition. So I literally text them and the girls. I text all of them today. I said, hey, before you buy the new Jordans that are coming out, or before you buy that next outfit, I said, stop and buy a few shares of stock. Okay. I said, same price. I said, you'll be glad that you started. Gave them the apps that I use. And this is a conversation I've been having with them. And this isn't the first text, but I just sent it today again, because I want to make sure they understand that I can show you, but at some point I move from being only your parent to being your coach. Right. Okay. Because as your parent, I've led by example, but now as your coach, I've got to say, hey, here's what you have to do to be successful, and then sit back and see if you're going to do it. Okay, so I sent that to them today, because it's that very same principle that, listen, you know, something that's going to be around later, do something with it now. Those sneakers, they're not even original releases anymore. It's you know, they've released that shoe 3 times already. It's just you hadn't bought it yet. So just wait and get you some stock, and then that shoe will come around again. So it's things like that, small things like that. And if we put it all together, I think that it's an overall message that we have to be not so much self-contained, but we have to be self-aware and understand what we need to do, so that we can be successful, but so that people around us can be successful, because we reproduce after our own kind. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we want to replace ourselves, but with the best version of ourselves.
Right. Right.
Absolutely. Well, Audrey and Pastor DJ, thank you so much for joining us here tonight for another conversation on faith.
Thank you.
We could not have done this without you. I know our audience is out there with tons of questions, and we'll get through those and respond to those. I'll make sure, Audrey, to put up the link for both AFI and for
Give Black.
I'll make sure both of those are up there, so we can have that as a reference. Until next time, because we do have something else coming up next month. I look forward to you. Have a good night, and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, everyone.
Blessings.
Bye-bye. Thank you.